We're obviously going to cut this because
I really botched this one.
You
don't use this as the intro thing.
God, do you know what you do?
No.
Welcome into the Ben Burnett Show, an App and Media podcast. My guest today is political consultant extraordinaire, poobah of all things political. He's been begging me for months to get a spot on the fastest growing podcast in the state of Georgia. Eamon Keegan, welcome in.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Appreciate it.
It's
a grand introduction there. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you have been kind of at the forefront of the Republican conservative movement here in North Fulton over the course of the last 2 years. And in spite of all of your begging, I did have every intention of eventually dragging you on to the podcast. He's speechless. Worst guest I've... This is why I didn't want to drag you into the podcast.
You're going to say Republicans now. We're endangered species in North Fulton. We're pretty much extinct in DeKalb now.
They've gone the way of the Brachiosaurus in DeKalb County. So I wanted to bring you in today, and in true Ben Burnett podcast fashion, I have no notes. I have no preparation. I generally know the subjects at who I am going to be speaking with, and we talk to each other like two folks who sit on a bar stool, and that's the motto. That's the model that we follow. Is there anything today that you don't want to talk about? No.
Everything's kind of fair game. I'll let you know as we go on.
Everything's fair game. So talk to me about what you saw kind of as this election cycle has slowed down. By the time this podcast airs, we will have a new United States Congress. We will have a new Georgia 6 Congresswoman in Lucy McBath. We will have an ever bluing and purpling North Fulton delegation down at the State House. What do you think drives all this?
Talking about why do we have such dramatic change?
Correct.
North Fulton, I guess at the outset, a lot of people thought that it was changing demographics up here, which is not as much the case in North Fulton. Sure, in Gwinnett and maybe DeKalb and Henry County, you see a lot more heavier minority movement from out of state into those communities. But North Fulton has stayed pretty much the same demographic numbers as has been in the last 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 years. But I think you're seeing a voter attitude change up here in who they vote for. I think it's easy to say, and I would agree with it, that Donald Trump's election has caused that. I mean, we've seen poll after poll and exit polling, and that particularly white, middle-aged, college-educated females do not like him. And in North Fulton, that is a major voting block. And what we saw in 2016 to now is that it's just the reliable suburban votes in Atlanta are decaying. And we saw a lot of legislatures, candidates a lot of them were fantastic candidates all around North Metro, go down for something that wasn't entirely their fault. And a lot of these Democrats that ran against some of these legislators, for lack of a better term, and it's no disrespect to them, they got elected, congratulations, but they were unknown candidates with very little money. They just essentially put their name in the ballot, and the die was cast.
What is the least amount, as a guy who studies it, who is the least funded Democrat in the North Fulton area to take down an incumbent Republican legislator?
The lady that ran against Betty actually had a lot of money. I was thinking about her, but that's not it. I would probably
her consultant follows me on Twitter. I'm
really?
Thinking about reaching out to him just so we can so I can have him on and have the same conversation with him from a little bit more objectivity than you're going to provide.
I think the least funded candidate was the lady Angelica Couchet. I might be saying that wrong. The lady that ran against Kelly Stewart in the 50th. In
Johns Creek?
Yeah, to replace Brad Raffensperger's seat.
Do you have any idea how much money she had?
I think it was about $28,000, $32,000 raised over the entire, because she did have a primary too. I think she raised $32,000 in the cycle.
When you say cycle, is that a primary and a general?
Yeah.
Wow, that's not a lot of money at all.
Not in Johns Creek. We've seen city council races in Johns Creek spend six figures.
Yeah, we've seen Real Housewives of Atlanta just spend funny money over there just to maintain status quo.
Yeah, there wasn't some candidates. I think the lady Mary Robichaux, she raised about 120, 130,000, so she had serious money.
That's movement.
Yeah, that's enough to change the game there. But other than that, I think she probably in North Fulton. She probably was the lady that ran against Deborah Silcox. May have been underfunded, but Deborah Silcox won pretty big compared to what Kemp got in the district. But I do think it was the Johns Creek Democrat that had the least amount of money and won by about 500, 600 votes.
How many percentage points was that?
I think it's by 1.3. They barely avoided the recount threshold.
Wow. Well, that's awfully close. When you get into these states, talk to me real quick about how many people will turn out for a state house race in North Fulton and a state senate race.
You mean in a general election?
In a general election.
The state house districts in North Fulton were typically somewhere between, I think, about 21,500 to about 26,000. Some of them actually had very similar elections to the presidential cycle turnout. I know for Chuck Martin's district, the 49th, we had about 24,000, 25,000 votes cast. I think it was about almost 95% of what voted in the 2016 presidential race.
Which is relatively unheard of.
I've never seen it. Actually, in fact, in 2014, in the last midterm cycle, I think that House District 49 had probably about 15,000 votes cast.
Wow.
So think about it. It was about, 47% turnout, and it went up to, mid-60s?
Right.
And then for the state Senate races, Senator Albers, District 56, had about almost exactly 80,000 votes. So
I had, as a guy who, once people listening, once you get the political bug, like there are not a ton of casual observers when you get into state politics. There's people that pay attention to what's going on, but you have a very avid voting block in your odd year elections of people that will turn out to vote for a ballot question initiative or a change to, if drinking at Sundays at 11 o'clock was only on the ballot, you have a handful of people that will show up no matter what's on the ballot. They'll vote. The same people always vote early, and the same people always vote on election day. And I think what's been really interesting to see are how many people that the president has managed to polarize, good and bad. For people that like him, and that there's not as many of those, I would say, in North Fulton as there are in South Georgia, but that cuts both ways because he's also got an even higher number of detractors. And it's really interesting to use the word trickle down as we talk about this, but it's interesting to watch almost presidential turnout like numbers for a governor's race.
It was interesting. If you look at South Georgia, because they're usually the first counties to come in because some of those counties only have one precinct, the entire county at large. But I remember a few of them started coming in early, like Appling and Jeff Davis, and just looking at the numbers, that Kemp was actually outperforming Trump. And I think even in margin and turnout as well, too. And once we saw that early, I think it was a good sign for Kemp because we knew when the suburbs were going to start coming in, he was going to have a harder time than a typical Republican would face there. But, I mean, Kemp turned out, he had a very, very strong rural campaign, and he got the vote out. They knew what they had to do to get him across the finish line, and they ran a very good campaign.
It's also really funny to take that South Georgia or far North Georgia mentality of a rural voter and look at states that are more rural, Alabama, Mississippi, and they pick up state legislator Republican seats. I think is hilarious. The fact that you sit here and almost fight two totally different wars from a political party system from one state to the next based on, here you've got Republican legislators clinging to dear life, hoping that, the tide turns against him I won't say the tide turns against him, but it's no secret that if he's on the ballot, it makes it a little more difficult.
Yeah.
Because people show up to vote either for him in certain parts of the state or against him. What do you think? How do you think that that's going to change over the course of the next 2 years? What do you see in the general election?
Well, that's a great question. So,
in 2 years for a presidential cycle.
as it relates to the local races? And how they're-
Yeah.
Well, big question is, so, a tidal wave came up to North Metro this cycle. It's never happened before. And the question was, some people got, wiped out. Some people got splashed in the face by the wave. The question is it going to get worse, or is this the best they can do? Because if last month was the best they can do, then people who hung on one barely or comfortably will probably win again. But if it gets worse, we're going to have some serious problems. You got to think the Fulton County House delegation, it's 25 seats, 13 Republican, 12 Democrat, and next month I believe it's only going to be, I think it's going to be 6 Republicans and 19 Democrats.
Yeah, that's a slaughtering.
That was we were definitely on election night. We were definitely, some races we expected to lose, but we definitely were taken aback. There were a lot of races that we did not. I was shocked.
Would you say, what do you think it is when you look in certain parts of North Fulton County and you see Roswell and you see a guy like John Albers, who is, I think everybody would agree, relatively conservative, and you see him get across the finish line with room to spare, and you see somebody like Representative Betty Price, who their politics are relatively similar.
Yeah, I would agree.
And she gets beat, but they overlap. What do you think? What do you attribute that to? Why does one win by 4 and one lose by 1?
That is a great question. I know Betty personally, but I can't test the race we ran or who was running it or what the strategy was. But I can just tell you for Senator Albers, we ran a great campaign. We knew what we had to do to win. We did a 360 campaign, good mail, doors, digital, television, and we knew our weakest or our most concerning demographic. We had to make sure we had to hold a white woman, and we did a very good job targeting that. And also came we did a very good job micro-targeting. I know other races, when it came to the Fulton County property tax issue, which was a big issue, well, we didn't mail them to apartments. Why would an apartment owner care about that? I had friends that lived in apartment complexes in other districts that were getting Republican property tax pieces, and you're just throwing money down.
He's a solid voice for homeowners.
What, Senator Albers?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. No, he's been a champion for taxpayers and homeowners for a very long time and does a lot of good work down in the Capitol. But we knew exactly what we had to do. We were very efficient. Like I said, we were mailing the right people. We knew who our swings were, who our soft Rs or softies. And I think a lot of campaigns probably in North Fulton focused too much on the property tax issue, thinking that was the holy grail. It was important. We polled it, but we discussed education in great detail too. We did our own mail for education. We were heavy on transportation, so we did a kind of a 360 approach on the issues too. Transportation, education, property taxes, and of course, Senator Albers' record. And I think that was a winning solution. When I think other candidates may have just focused too much on just one issue, and I don't think that was enough, because the property tax issue is important, but when you have record high turnout, like I said, most people aren't really aware of what's going on here. You go to Inside Baseball and you drop mail pieces that are 1,500 words. No one's going to read that.
Do you think that were people putting out mail pieces with 1,500 words on them?
Oh, well, I got to show you my binder in the next couple weeks here. It's a
novel.
I always keep other people's mailers, but I always like to make mine simple. People can read it in 25 seconds. Some good pictures, nice graphics, but some mailers. Actually, it was funny. I saw some candidates actually. 3 different candidates had the exact same mail template, just with a different name on it. But that's just the kind of stuff. Look, if you want to win these seats in North Fulton, they can be won, but you have to work extremely hard. It's got to be laser focused, on point. You can't do, the days of cookie cutter campaigns are over now. You have to work your butt off to hold these seats. It's a different environment, and your business model has to change. And you got to put in, 100-hour weeks. I remember the last week before the election, I think I clocked out at 105 hours.
Tell me this. Do you talk about the demographics and the politics of Roswell to Alpharetta to Johns Creek? How are they the same and how are they different?
That is a great question. I've thought about that many times. You're the first person to ask.
I typically ask the questions that other podcasts leave out.
Great question. So I think Roswell, if you just look at historical turnout in municipal elections, Alpharetta is usually the lowest. Johns Creek's the second lowest. Roswell usually has and people are going to think I'm crazy here, but Roswell typically has higher off-year election turnout. It ranges between 11 to 15, 18, 20%. Of course, that's bad, but looking at everything else, that's well above average. Usually, an off-year cycle, if it's 10,
because here it's about 10 or 11.
Yours was actually a little higher than it usually was.
Well, I was polarizing.
Yeah. But I remember the last
and humble.
The last municipal race we had before yours in 2017 was Donald Mitchell when he won, and that was 6.9% turnout.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you heard his podcast, that guy can put you to sleep.
Oh no, don't make fun.
I'm kidding.
Donald's good. But I think Alpharetta generally is more apathetic. I think that changed in the last year and a half. I think people were a lot more engaged, particularly on homeowner issues and development, and we saw a lot more engagement in the process. I don't know if things are going to go back to normal before this last year and a half in Alpharetta. I'm not sure. We'll see. We got four races up in less than a year from now. But Roswell has just a very interesting political culture. There's a lot of big factions there. A lot of the HOAs, you have major HOAs around the city like Martin's Landing, Horseshoe Bend.
Big neighborhoods.
Neighborhoods.
And from a residential perspective, how many residents does Roswell have?
Close to 100,000.
So it's almost twice the size of Alpharetta.
And also the other thing, too, about Roswell is there's still an old core of voters there from the old town, so to speak. Alpharetta 30 years ago was a population of 3,800 people. 30 years ago for Roswell, it was about 18,000 people. It was still it was small town, but a significant size, and a lot of them are still here. Mm-hmm. And that group always participates. And a lot of those, master plan communities like Horseshoe Bend and Brookfield Country Club, look, they've been around for 20, 25 years. In an Alpharetta election, we always talk about Windward. It's a major HOA, but think about Roswell. They have like 2 or 3 or 4 of those. Yeah, and they always come out. Either they usually come out big in municipal elections, and they usually go one way or the other for each candidate. Like we've seen in Windward. I mean, you want to get elected to Alpharetta, you have to talk to Windward, and a lot of candidates ignore it. And on election night, they're always disappointed.
And go to Johns Creek, because Johns Creek is a community to me that represents. It's a little bit more like Alpharetta in the sense that it is a newer, younger city. It doesn't have the baked in my grandparents lived here, so forth. But at the same time, Alpharetta is a much older city, but they're both relatively new. With people that moved here, like me.
Yeah, I mean, look at a satellite map of Alpharetta and Johns Creek from 25 years ago. I mean, completely different now. When it said Roswell always had something going on, but I think for Johns Creek, they do have low participation, but there's one community that has just usually doesn't show up. I mean, Johns Creek has the biggest Asian population, biggest Asian community in the state. I know 4 years ago, Jay Lynn got elected the first Asian American to Johns Creek City Council, and he engaged them very well. I think he got out an extra 1,800 Asian voters, and that's what carried him across the finish line, because he only won that election. I think that's the first time Chris Coughlin ran, and he beat him by 5 points. So he was able to mobilize that. But Johns Creek's an interesting city. It's apathetic. But if good candidates start making inroads to the Asian community there, it can boost turnout. But by and large, Johns Creek's a pretty well-functioning city. Mayor Bodker does a good job. The council...
I like him a lot. I like Jay Lynn a lot, too.
He's a good guy. Bradbury, Coughlin, they have a very interesting council mix. And, you would think on paper they wouldn't get along, but they actually get a lot of things done. And overall, I mean, the city's run well. They have a very good police department, fire department. Their government is very responsive in all levels of service. So... generally in municipal elections, when people are happy, they don't show up. In Roswell, they always tend to be upset about something, and that's why they always have a higher turnout. Actually, in fact, I'm thinking about this in 2015, I believe Marcelo Zapata and Palermo, I don't remember his first name. Mike. They had they were 2 underfunded campaigns that ran against 2 incumbents, and one of them beat an incumbent by 20, and the other one by 48 points.
Wow.
And
that's hard to do.
For Roswell, it's just hard. You can be an incumbent and do a great job, and you can have a candidate who came out of nowhere and put his name on the ballot and lose by and just get blown out. It's just a weird city that's very hard to predict. In our business, we like predictability, and Roswell's certainly not a city you can do that in.
What would you tell somebody that was interested in getting their foot in the door in politics, knowing that there's obviously going to be a presidential election in 2 years, but for anybody that's interested in local community service, when does that groundwork really begin if you're going to declare early, get out in front, and either run against an incumbent or run for an open seat? Talk to me a little bit about that process.
I always advise people when they want to move up the community ladder, maybe to elected official someday, usually a city council, I say get involved in your homeowners association. That's a great way to start. And then also do it as well or separately. Get on a city board. There's always openings. There's always opportunities to serve in the city. I mean, most cities have the same boards by state law. You have Parks and Rec, Planning, a Development Authority, a Board of Zoning Appeals, Code Enforcement. There's lots of opportunities to serve, and there's usually spaces open, and a lot of people would be happy to get some new blood on these city commissions. But
we're not any different. I think we constantly, I talk to our city officials all the time because it's twofold, and one of them self-serving. Obviously, if you're interested in local community service and I find you a place to serve, you're probably going to vote for me.
That's probably true.
But the other part of that is that you have to have a pretty broad reach into all the sections of town, all the neighborhoods, and it's important to engage people and to develop new residents newer residents or people with young kids so that you can keep restocking your pipeline with people who are honestly influencers in your community. If you sit on a board in the city of Alpharetta, you very rarely don't know what's going on.
Oh, I agree. I remember the Appin newspaper quoted me in an article back before the primary about it was money in politics, and money does make a difference. I always say money, it's not the most important thing, but it gives you options. But in addition to that, for these local races, it's about, like you said, who you know in the community here. And we've seen countless times where the underfunded campaign wins and wins big. Mm-hmm. I mean, we look at Lori Henry's race in Roswell. She was outspent 3.5 to 1. She won by 10.
Yeah.
Mayor Jim Gilvin was Mayor Jim Gilvin was outspent, more than 2 to 1, won by 7, 8, 6, something like that. I mean, a comfortable win. And it's because those candidates were on the ground and built up a Rolodex of average people who, when those campaigns started, went out and knocked on doors for free, made emails, hosted coffees and meet and greets. When it comes to municipal elections, a lot of the times that's how those races are won, just by people.
You can go statewide or you can go local. What do you see over the course of the next year will be really influential in Alpharetta politics? What do you think turns people out to vote?
I would think a big thing would be a homestead exemption, property tax relief. I mean, when it comes to these, especially these off-year elections, it's very popular. And you look at some cities like Alpharetta. I mean, we ran on this issue 2 years ago that, the city's revenues in Alpharetta are at an all-time high, big surpluses. With the Avalon tax abatement wearing off, it's going to increase with more development in Avalon. The local option sales tax is increasing, that the city's bringing in a lot more money. Our bond rating is still firm to AAA. And I believe government is in the business to serve people, not to make money. And there's a point where, it's time to give some back. And I think I know your leadership and others on the council are going to be talking about doing a homestead exemption ballot referenda, the first time in almost 10 years. And I think it's important we get it done.
Do you think that that's something that turns people out to vote?
It depends. Ultimately, it's money back in people's pocket. You'd like to say so. It'll depend what's also on the ballot. And then if you have more contested races, it's going to increase people out. But also, a lot of times these referendums people don't run campaigns. A lot of times they lose because people don't campaign on it.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I really think will resonate with people, and I think it's one of the lessons that you've taught me as much as anybody, is you give people a reason to vote for something that you did. Mm-hmm. And so whatever that looks like, whether there are there's a mayor in Alpharetta, there's a mayor in 3 contested races here. And if none of them go challenged, I wanted to see the average resident who goes to the poll and votes all the time know that we were still working to give them an opportunity to have a say and to make a point to either give us an affirmative on what we were doing right or offer the opportunity to give corrective or criticism. And I thought that was a great way to do it. I think it's very important to let the average person enjoy the success that your community has, because we're about to embark. I think our homestead exemption, when we get to 45,000, will be 3 times higher than the next closest one in the state of Georgia.
We definitely will have the highest in the state.
Are you offering me the opportunity to tell me I was wrong?
No. Wow.
I do think it was. I do think it'll be 3 times higher. It's 3. I know for a fact it's 3 times higher than anybody else in Fulton County, and that was important to us because as much as we compete with the cities around us, you also compete to see how well you can do. You didn't see Tiger Woods ever take his foot off the gas.
No, I agree. I'm a general homestead exemption that size does not exist. I know Canton has a very large homestead exemption, but it's for only 65 and up. It doesn't apply to everyone. But when it comes to a general straight homestead exemption, I think Alpharetta is leading the way on that issue. And you got to think about Alpharetta's balance sheet. So we're going to have $45,000 homestead exemption. We bonded $29 million in 2011 for the city center project. We just bonded $59 million in 2016 for a great infrastructure and parks bond, without raising the millage rate and keeping our AAA credit rating. And now we're going to do another $5,000 in homestead exemption. I mean, that tells you the leadership we have on council right now to get that done.
Well, a lot of that goes back to the professional staff sending things back, asking people for a better price, making sure that everything's looked at. But moving away from there, what do you see the contentious issues? Do you think that we'll go national for a minute? Mm-hmm. How big of a farce do you believe that the wall is on the United States-Mexico border over $5 billion in a government shutdown?
Are they going to build it or not? I don't know.
No, well, they're trying to figure it out. But I think what's so hilarious is that if Donald Trump wanted to build the wall, he'd move $5 billion from one allocated pot of money into another.
Yeah.
He can do that. Do you think that he keeps that as is that his Milton County issue?
Because Milton County never happened.
No, I'm saying is that his political football that he just wants to get out because he knows that it
riles up the base.
One, it riles up the base, but two, I do think that the vast majority of people in this country, whether they vote or not, feels like a strong immigration policy is a part of that. And to me, that's just his calling card.
Yeah.
What do you see as he? Do you think that that's something that he gets done, or do you think that that's something that he would rather continue to have, much like some of our elected officials in North Fulton County get the Milton County card out when they want to rile up the base and get people excited, and they know that they don't have the votes?
I think what's going to happen is that it's not going to happen, and he's going to during his reelect, he's going to campaign that the Democrats wouldn't let it happen. I think he's going to blame them to rile up his base.
What do you think that he tries to get done now with a Democrat-controlled House and a Senate? Where do you think he chooses to go?
That's a great question. If I had to say that now, I think it's going to be a lot on trade policy.
In what way? You think he's going to go back to the unions? What do you think he's going to? How do you think that's going to?
Possibly. I mean, I think it's going to mainly be international trade issues, tariffs. Trade relations with competing countries. I think that's what they're going to have to work on. But on the other side of things, I think the problem with the Democratic Congress here, I think they're so polarized that they won't do anything with him. Well, look, we've seen Congresses and president relationships in the past. With Bush, when they got wiped out in 2006, they would still work with Bush on some issues. Even with Obama, to some degree, they would work on a few things. But I think this time, you're not going to see much cooperation or dialogue between the Democratic House and the presidency.
Do you believe that his philosophy of flogging people early and often is going to tire the American voter who would generally, and I'll make no secret, I voted for the guy the first time, and I don't know that I would do it again. Do you think that there are a lot of people like me, there are enough people like me he can keep to where they'd vote for him again? Because if you look at the guy's body of work, did NAFTA needed to be looked at in some way. Trade policies need to be looked at in some ways. And the United States doesn't need to necessarily always be the piggy bank for the European Union and the the Pacific Partnership Agreement. What do you? And I don't think he's necessarily wrong on any of those things. I don't know that the Democrats think he's wrong on them either, because when you're getting taken advantage of, and that's not partisan. But do you think that the average person like me? Do you think the average person, separate from me rather, has the ability to hear and understand what those agreements entail, or do you think they just revert back to the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, and their and CNN and make opinions? How do you educate somebody on issues like that?
It's very hard in this day and age. People aren't going to take the time to go. We're in an age in the media now where people know what channels to listen to have them say what they agree with, and they tune into that, and that's all they believe. Both sides. And I think that's part of the reason why we have such a polarized environment this day. But going back to what you earlier said about staying with Trump in 2020, a lot of it is going to depend on what the Democrats offer as their nominee. And from what I've seen right now is that they're moving further and further left. There's very few centrist candidates I've seen that have been talked about. And if they nominate someone who's very far left, they might possibly well lose the election in 2020 and Trump gets a reelect.
I think that if you give 2 more years and things don't change and the economy stays still, I think you see Donald Trump lose in Georgia. What do you think that's fair, or is that a bridge too far?
He won it by about 5.3. Then Kemp won it by about 1.5, I think. I think David Perdue will get reelected. I do think that.
Oh, I do too.
He's a fantastic politician. He gives fantastic constituent services. He goes and talks to all voters around the state, no matter their background, race. He reaches out to everyone. So it's possible that I could see Purdue hanging on. I do think that the election will be very, very close. Is it possible that the Democrats could pick up Georgia? Yeah, but it depends on what candidate they have to offer.
Do you think they'd be more? You think they're more inclined to pick up North Carolina than they are to pick up here?
Yeah, I would say one reason why North Carolina
or Florida.
Florida just always seems to go Republican. It's just amazing. Every election, it always just seems to lean R. And their statewide offices in presidential elections. Florida's gone Republican. Since the last 20 years, except I think Clinton's reelected and Obama. Actually, Obama did win it twice. The second time he won it by only like 40,000 votes. But Florida's always been a center-right state. But North Carolina is interesting. You're seeing a lot of young white liberals move there, especially to the Research Triangle area.
And then banking jobs in Charlotte.
Mecklenburg area. So I think he's got a better... I think the Democrats have a much better opportunity to pick up North Carolina than Georgia. And I believe history serves Trump won Georgia by about +5. I think North Carolina Trump only won it by about 2.25. It was very close.
It was one of those states on election night where it was, if he won Florida and he won North Carolina,
then his path
then you could
up.
watch.
Yeah, if he won, his 3 states were Florida, North Carolina, and Ohio. If he won those 3, then he was in play.
I still I have this conversation with former council member Mike Kennedy relatively regularly, because I think a Republican primary for a sitting Republican president, I've never seen it in my lifetime. Have you?
It happened against Ford. I think Reagan ran against Ford, or Bush ran against Ford in the 76
so that wasn't my
primary. I think for the Democrat side, didn't someone ran against Lyndon Johnson, and then he lost the first state in the primary. Then he just said, "I'm not running." Okay,
so for all intensive purposes, over the course of my lifetime and your lifetime, we've not seen somebody challenge an incumbent Republican. And I made this comment the other day because
no, we have not.
Mike Kennedy, who I think we all sit there and have an element of doubt on what the president is capable of if he keeps his rhetoric and his demeanor up. And I think that there are the vast majority of people that look at some of the policies and go, I'm a guy who will take the good with the bad, and I do that from a finished product. I hate the process of how he chooses to get there.
I would agree.
But he he was making a comment that Jeff Flake, retiring senator from Arizona, or John Kasich would be a formidable opinion or be a formidable opponent for him. Do you think that those two guys could hold a candle up to him in a nationwide primary season?
Most likely, no. I'm a big John Kasich fan, and I don't think in a Republican primary, and obviously it depends on the way the calendar is set up, but what Republican primary electorate in the state would not like Trump? I'm thinking probably California, maybe the West Coast, but when it comes to the Midwest, they love him. The South, he's got the evangelical vote locked up. You know, the working Northeast,
which is hilarious.
Yes, it's interesting how some voting blocks gravitate to one candidate or party when it makes
who has nothing in common with them.
That's exactly that. It's one of the fascinating things about voting behaviors. But I don't. Obviously, John Kasich offers some. If it was another conservative like a Ted Cruz, I'm just making a name up here, it would be no why change. But if John Kasich would be a clear contrast in two different directions the party would be going. I just think it would be very hard to knock off an incumbent president in a primary.
Oh, I certainly agree. And I think part of that is that the race that you run in a primary and the race that you run in a general are oftentimes, as Casey Cagle would tell you, they're not the same.
They're not the same, no. I mean, I remember that, that seems like ancient history ago. But, Casey Cagle's campaign, I remember their TV ads were all, great general election ads.
Guns and trucks and
for Governor-elect Kemp. I mean, look, he knew what he had to do to win the primary. Look, the primary vote is not about it's rallying up the base. It's a little bit of entertainment and some substance, and that's why Kemp got in. And of course, Cagle made some unfortunate mistakes, but that's what you have to do. I mean, running cookie cutter, it's all good. General election style commercials in the primary is not a path to win.
Do you feel like Donald Trump has the ability to become the consensus guy that liberals can eventually come to respect certain things like they did with Reagan, or is it just way too far?
No, I mean, Reagan was a fantastic communicator. He was a classy guy. I mean, Reagan, he was very well respected. I mean, he realigned a lot of the voter. I mean, a Republican winning, Rhode Island.
Yeah, not today.
Or Oregon or Hawaii
or California
or Maryland. Those were different times, and he was a great leader, and a lot of people respected him. And also, I was talking with someone else about a week and a half ago about being young in your 30s or your 20s and being a Republican. It's not cool anymore. It's not cool, and it's actually borderline not socially acceptable. But you go back to the Reagan days, back then, being a 33-year-old or a 25-year-old Reagan supporter, that was in. It was accepted and respected. But, about just our party in general, we're having problems with under 40 voters now.
Do you think that's one of the reasons that the higher-ups at the Republican Party invest a lot of time in the folks like myself or Jason or the guys in Johns Creek like Bradbury or Chris Coughlin? Mm-hmm. Do you think it's just because they wonder what? Because I can tell you, and I think this is more or less. I would say that it's probably relatively safe to say this. The Georgia locally, with respect to the state of Georgia, it's been religious freedom, and I have to be honest with you. I think that there are so many legislators that use that issue across the state to discriminate against homosexuals. And I don't necessarily, I agree with the premise of it, but at the same time, I also realize that we have to function as an economy. And I feel like I can always defend religious freedom from a position in the Georgia General Assembly or in Alpharetta and still be good for business. I think both things can be true. And I think that we've made some of these arguments too polarizing. I give Nathan Deal a ton of credit for, he knew what it meant from a business perspective to let those guys at the State House fight over it and be like, guys, I'm not going to sit here and jeopardize industry that we didn't have forever and may lose again if we do something like this. And while at the same time, yes, I'm going to be decent to people. Like I'll defend religious freedom, but let's find an actual fight to have. I feel like there are so many things that get ginned up because they're controversial that don't actually have any sort of teeth.
A lot of times people, put legislation out there just to prove a point. The RFRA is a great example. It's not going to pass. There's not enough Republicans are for it. Democrats are against it. I think, in my opinion, it's not good for the state, especially when marketing the Republican Party to new movers from across the country. But a lot of these rural districts are big fans of it because the base likes the red meat, and a lot of times, and you can't blame people, but if you're down in South Georgia, you view everything as, Atlanta gets their way again, Atlanta gets their way, and they want their legislators to drop legislation that is very conservative but not practical.
Do you think that there are where do you see the Georgia General Assembly as they have to get, as the Republican Party and the Democrats have to get in a room because they're in a path now where there are fewer seats that separate them? Do you think that the issues get more polarizing or less? And I say that in a way, how do you think they choose? What battles do you think they choose to fight? Do you think that they're the finance, bonding, transportation battles, or do you think they continue to polarize themselves with issues that people don't actually care about?
I think you're going to see a lot of fighting over education funding.
In what way?
You're not giving it enough. I mean, one thing that Democrats always do is if they're expecting education to increase by 7% next year, and Republicans only increase it by 5%, they call that a decrease in education funding. Happens in every state. That's the kind of games they play, and it works sometimes. But I think the Republican leadership down in the Capitol has done a fantastic job with getting education funded and teacher salary increases a couple of years ago, and the whole QBE formula, protecting and preserving Hope Scholarship. But the Democrats always find an opportunity to find whatever technicality they can to put out a narrative that Republicans are gutting education.
They don't care about kids.
Exactly. So I think that's what you're probably going to see primarily there. I think this session, it's going to be very interesting. I mean, it's the first time in 8 years we've had a new governor, so my gut tells me things are going to move a lot slower this time. Going to be a wait and see how the governor and his office and staff approach doing business with the legislature.
Do you think Governor-elect Kemp's going to give out free credit monitoring again?
I don't know about that.
Well, lastly, and we'll end here. What do you see in the General Assembly this time through? Talk real quick about the candidates that you had represented and what you think their issues are going to be in the 2019-2020 General Assembly session. Individually, who'd you work with?
On the Senate side, directly Senator Albers. Then on the House side, Representative Chuck Martin and also Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones. I think they're all very wise, pragmatic leaders. I think they're an all of the above type elected leader. I expect education is going to be talked about heavily. It's a good question. Transportation will be there as well too. I don't think. Well, we'll see what happens with destination resorts. I know there's some things I liked about that, but it might be too controversial in the first year for a governor to do. But it's a good question. We'll see what they are. But I mean, look, Speaker Pro Tem Jones runs a very good with David Ralston and Speaker Ralston. They run a very good operation down there and getting things done passed, and they work together with Democrats on a lot of things. A lot of things pass.
Oh, sure.
But no one ever knows that. Though.
Nobody. That's the thing that
it's unfortunate.
Even among 7 people, there are issues that you can't find 7 people to agree on the color of a wall.
Yeah,
and 95% of the things anybody votes on are 179 to 1. Or 100, you know what I mean? There's 7.
Yeah, who's the guy up from Tiger? Matt Gertler.
Yeah,
you can always count him to be the one vote.
Well, and there's I think that the vast majority. The biggest thing I get asked this regularly about what's the biggest surprise, or that there's actually very little disagreements and fighting over almost everything
down there,
everywhere.
Oh, I would agree.
At a city hall, at a county commission. There's very little fighting over almost everything.
I would say probably about 95% of things that get passed down there are all worked out in agreement, and everyone gets what they want. It's that 5% that always makes the news.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's unfortunate, but that's part of the process. But you'd be surprised. Democrats and Republicans do do a good job at working together for the most part. But yeah, there's always going to be the big issues, are always going to be the divisive ones that get the attention. But
who do you think who are the people? And I'm going to start asking people this: who do you think the people are that we should be watching? Locally elected folks that you think that you see a lot of potential in.
That might move up to higher office.
Yeah, if they were in Johns Creek, if they were in Roswell, who do you think they would be?
For the Republican side, we're going to have an open competitive primary for the 6th district to take it back.
Yeah, that's a stretch to see a city council person to run for Congress.
Yeah, that's true.
Not that it's never been done.
Maybe for a large city, if you're serving like a city at large post of like 400,000 people, but
no. But who do you see out of that? It's no secret that the Democrats just took several seats in communities that surround us, and there's no secret that the Republican Party here will fight tooth and nail to not let that stay. Who are the people that you think you could identify right now on one hand that are prime targets to run on a GOP ticket? I
think locally for the Johns Creek district, I mean, someone like a Jay Lynn, who's a conservative Republican, running for that would be a perfect candidate. He's going to engage a new voting bloc, which is a massive part of Johns Creek that doesn't get engaged, and he's a reasonable, pragmatic guy who would do a good job.
Absolutely. Anybody in Roswell?
I think there's a couple council members that live in Betty Price's district that would make might make good candidates. I think the two offhand are Matt Judy and Matt Tizer. Those would probably be strong candidates. Then for Wendell Willard's old seat, that was flipped as well. You might have a Sandy Springs. Actually, I think there's a couple of Roswell City Council members because that district's
split,
a part of East Roswell. I do think there's good talent on the bench for a lot of the seats we lost. But I think one lesson learned is that it's not business as usual up here. If you want these seats, you got to spend money and you have to work hard. These are not layup campaigns anymore where you have a competitive primary, spend a lot of money, then just have a layup in the general, drop a few mail pieces and you're in 60-40. Those days are over with now, unless you're in Cherokee or Forsyth County.
Yeah, I'm sure the sitting folks that sit in locally elected office that are a little more on the conservative leaning side are very envious of the job that an incumbent Republican has in Forsyth or Cherokee County.
Oh, I have a feeling in 2021 when they redistrict that everyone in Fulton County is going to want to take a precinct or two of Cherokee or Forsyth.
Yeah.
You're going to see a lot of squiggly lines run up there, up to exit 13.
Well, Eamon, thanks for joining us today. Anything you want to leave the fine people of Alpharetta with? How do they get in touch with you if they're interested in kicking around the idea of running for office?
You can find me online. My number's out there, so add me on Facebook.
Well, thanks, man. I always enjoy talking to you. Stop by. I'll have you back in maybe 6 months or a year. 2 years, sometime.
5 years.
5 years. Yeah, you'll be the Matt Damon to the. So we didn't have time for him. Well, thanks everybody. This has been another episode of the Ben Burnett Show. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.